Hello everyone, I just realized that when I submitted this to YouTube the first time that it actually did not record in a resolution that was actually readable, so nobody could see the text that I wrote up here. So I get to re-record this video. So here is the sample AntSim problem that I promised you guys from lecture. And so the objective is to write a function that takes in the ant_info tuple that should be given in a tick function, which is this format right here, an integer n, and a reference to a function that will return the distance to a point. We'll talk about that function in a moment. But what we mean by a reference to a function is something like what a lambda would return, or just writing the name of a function without calling it, kind of like what you'd put in self.clicked. That is a reference to a function. It's basically the name of the function. So we have this ant_info here. This is going to be our first parameter. So this is a particular ant's information, or this is what would be contained within this ant_info tuple. It would actually be a tuple of these things, so we'd have x, y, view, comma, dot, dot, dot. And so we'd have quite a few of those in this particular tuple, just like you would have in the actual AntSim homework when you were doing it. So what we want to do is return the number of ants that are within the distance n of the point 0, 0 on the board. So that's within a distance n of the upper left-hand corner on the board. And the way we're going to determine whether they are within that distance is to pass that information into the distance function that we are given in this function as what the third parameter to this function we're going to write. So let's start off by writing the function header. So we're going to start off with what we usually do with def. And I'm just going to call this answer since it didn't specify what the name was. So we get the ant_info tuple. We get an n, which is going to be our distance threshold, and we're getting the distance function. Okay, so here is our code that we're going to write. I don't like it when Word does this. Very obnoxious. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to initialize a counter, because we do want to keep track of how many ants are within distance n. So now that we have our counter initialized, we need to look at each particular ant inside of our ant_info tuple, and each ant is one of these small tuples inside of the large ant_info tuple. So what I'm going to say is for every ant in ant_info, so that's going to give us each one of those small tuples. And so now what we're going to do is we are going to call our distance function with the given xy position in this particular ant and 0, 0. So it tells us that our distance function takes in 4 parameters. The x and y position of the ant, those are our first 2 parameters out of 4, and the x and y position of the destination. So our destination is 0, 0. So I'm going to say distance is equal to distance function, and then we're going to say ant index 0 for the ant's x, ant index 1 for the ant's y, and 0, 0 for x and y of the destination. And so distance is now going to contain our integer distance from the position 0, 0 of this ant that we're looking at. So then after that we want to say if distance is less than or equal to n, which is our threshold distance, then we need to increment count by 1. So count plus equals 1. And so now that we're done with that, that's all that we need to do. So outside of the for loop, we're going to return count. So if you like functional programming, you can do this with functional programming. That's cool. That's not what I wanted. That was the link to the old broken video. So there is a way to do this with functional programming. Adam wrote it earlier, and unfortunately I don't have that anymore. So otherwise I was going to show that to you. But this is what you need to be able to write right here. This is, a pretty simple AntSim question. We're not going to ask you anything incredibly complicated or ask you to code an AI, because that would be completely and utterly outrageous and silly to ask you on this exam. So that's not going to happen. This is about the appropriate level of difficulty that we would ask you. So if you have any questions, make sure to ask during office hours or on Piazza. And that's all for this practice question.